listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schleifhuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We have a great and jam-packed show for you today. Bob, you have to use the adjective great because a jam-packed show could still blow. Fortunately, that will not be the show. The show is awesome. We'll start with discussing the disastrous unemployment numbers that were released this morning, juxtaposed against the priorities of the governing parties, Democrat and Republican. I am waiting, hoping, praying to a non-existent God that at some point between now and the expected 200,000 dead Americans that the public finally balks and demands rational action to deal with the needs beyond those of the owner class. There is something seriously wrong with this country if this pandemic does not make that clear. I'm not sure what is or what will. Next, piggybacking on the theme that something is severely wrong with this country, a new disturbing report by the New York Times indicates that the COVID pandemic, or as the COVID pandemic gripped the United States, Trump's government has deported hundreds of kids without the knowledge of their parents. Let me repeat that. Trump's administration has deported hundreds of confused, crying, tearful kids without their parents' knowledge. I know there's some hateful and racist people in this country, but even for them, this policy is infinitely disgusting and entirely indefensible. Later in the hour, we'll lighten it up a bit with a pop quiz on recent polling that is at once shocking, funny, and mystifying. You're not going to want to miss this segment. You'll get up to date with the latest polling and be entertained in the process. Can't beat that. In the next hour, we'll get into my not so guilty pleasure of foreign policy with extremely interesting developments taking place around the world. We'll start off with the UK as it grapples with the EU over Brexit. Negotiations are hitting the rocks as the Tory government under the COVID-free Prime Minister Boris Johnson has to now work out the actual details of what Brexit means. Yes, they're still trying to figure out what Brexit actually means. Next, we'll discuss the news coming out of the Ukraine of a judge naming Joe Biden as the alleged perpetrator of a crime that Biden has already admitted to on stage, actually. Last but not least, we'll delve into the EU's opposition to Israel's illegal annexation plans of the Palestinian territories and whether the EU has any leverage at all to credibly intervene. Now, Russia is taking the lane that America has abandoned. That's if America ever legitimately occupied that particular lane of peacemaker. But basically, Russia has petitioned to hold multilateral peace talks to reach some level of a resolution. Last but not least, it is Thursday. That means the sexiest named segment on the network, Trends with Benefits. This is our segment for elucidating the latest fashionable occurrences in your society and by extension, your world. And our producer, the witty Miss Witty, will be on set. But let's start here. The latest job numbers have been released. 2.4 million additional human beings, breathing, loving, feel pain, just like you and me, are now without a job, bringing the total to a Great Depression era of 38.6 million human beings. Also, it should be noted that 43% of these jobs are likely to not come back, regardless of what Trump is trying to imply and what the Republicans are lying about. It's true that we've been hit with a pandemic. It is not true, however, that it had to turn out this way. 90,000 people dead, 1.5 million people infected with a virus that we knew for months was coming. We could look over the pond at China and see the reactions and the actions that they were taking, not to mention, regardless of what Donald Trump is saying about the World Health Organization, the United States puts a lot of money in the World Health Organization and people in that organization relaying information to us on how bad this pandemic actually was. For all the blaming of China, don't believe the hype. We knew how bad it was. We chose not to act. Nevertheless, Donald Trump, we've done nothing wrong. Let's hear Trump saying he wouldn't do necessarily anything different. Let's hear the clip.
What would you have done differently facing this crisis?
Well, nothing. If you take New York and New Jersey, which were very hard hit, we were very, very low. And in terms of morbidity and in terms of, you look at the death, relatively speaking, we're at the lowest level along with Germany. Germany, us, there could have been some smaller countries too, perhaps. I'd like to ask you maybe about that, if I could, Deborah. We've done, amazing well. I think the biggest thing we did is stopping the inflow from China into our country.
Attack China, attack China, attack China. Joe Biden and Donald Trump has picked up on this notion of attack China to obfuscate for their own failures regarding this particular pandemic. Not just failures, inability to act, and inability to act rationally within regards to what is in the best interest of the society and the public. The question becomes, when does this change? When does the public balk and walk? When do they finally get to the point of a yellow vest movement that's taking place in France and say, enough! This is irrational behavior, especially in the context of our human life. You are prioritizing the owner class over our best interests. And even if you wanted to ensure that the jobs were kept, you could have still put through rational policy to ensure that. No, they decided to give a bunch of money to corporations as opposed to dealing with the material needs of the population itself. According to the New York Times, if the United States had begun imposing social distancing measures 1 week earlier than it did in March, about 36,000 fewer people would have died. 36,000 fewer people would have died from the coronavirus outbreak, according to new estimates from Columbia University disease models. Incompetence. I've said before that it is difficult to govern while incompetent, and this is basically making the point. The public is not buying Trump. They don't believe it. They believe, yes, they may blame China to the tune of 75% having some level of culpability. But the catch is, the public also believes that social distancing works and would prefer social distancing over giving this undue attention to the economic interests of the top 1% as opposed to the people in the country, many of which voted for Donald Trump to put him in that office. To show that the public is not having it, a new model has come out basically making the point that Donald Trump is going to lose in a landslide. This same model beforehand predicted that Donald Trump would actually win this race. But because he is doing so bad and because he's losing constituencies that he, for the most part, carried, this is digging into his numbers. Nevertheless, Donald Trump shows no ability or hint that he is pulling back. He is still working in the interest of the 1%. He is organized to this notion that we got to get the economy back up and running, even if people need to die in the process. And so Trump has taken on an additional policy, along with his Republicans, of being against providing additional funding, meaning the modest $600 that people were getting for their unemployment benefits, they are now against giving that, especially expanding it all the way out to January, something that the Democratic Party wants to do. Now, if you want to tag on to this notion that we can get rid of it after the coronavirus or something to that effect, okay, maybe. But let's just be very clear. This notion that our economy is just going to kick back on, that the Republicans are making it out to be, is nonsense. 43% of those jobs are not expected to come back. Many of these small businesses have no capacity to close for this period of time. And without the government giving those small businesses funding in order to keep those employees on the payroll as opposed to those employees basically losing their jobs, well, those businesses also start to go under. This is a result of an incompetent government, not the pandemic in and of itself. It is drastically important that you understand the difference. Yes, there would have always been some level of havoc, but just like this study is pointing out, 36,000 fewer people would have died if the government would have acted reasonably and responsibly and attended to the needs of its population, not the needs of its business. This is not just the Republicans, by the way. Let's be very clear. The Democratic Party gave the Republican Party everything that they wanted. 4 bills. One stimulus plan after the next, giving a bunch of money to all of these corporations while giving the public a measly $1,200. Something that, by the way, doesn't even pay rent. Cops have just put out that they're going to be engaging in evictions. Basically, people can't afford their rents. this argument about a rent strike and all of this other stuff. When the Democratic Party put out their showpiece of a bill that they knew had no chance of passing, what did they not add in it was the thing that were most important. They gave away giveaways to lobbyists, giveaways to insurance companies. They basically gave away money to organizations that work against progressive priorities. Medicare for All has an 88% approval rating. Eliminating the student debt has over 70% approval rating. And I'm talking about for Democrats. We are talking about the Democratic Party after all. Even a majority of the public agrees with both policies. And yet, you can't get the Democratic Party to back those in a showpiece bill where the only people who are making that bill was them. Now, they come out with the showpiece bill after passing the Republican priorities. My point is, if that party really indeed wanted to deal with the material benefits or the material ills of our society, it wouldn't be in a showpiece bill. It would have been in a bill that Nancy Pelosi put up and fought the Republicans on in order to get their priorities accomplished. Instead, they just gave away the farm. Only after the fact of losing all leverage did they come up and say, hey, maybe we need to get some other things accomplished because the public is not in good shape. Add to this one Bernie Sanders. Now, Bernie Sanders has signed, or is getting his people, his delegates, to sign a letter basically saying, I will not protest the DNC. Maybe you should protest the DNC. Maybe you should protest a party that is not living up to the interests of the population. How do you get 88% of the public backing any policy, let alone Medicare for All, something that at one point was not all that popular? We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have nearly 40 million people that have lost their insurance. And the Democratic Party is pushing Cobra. They're pushing Cobra. Maybe those people should protest Sanders. Maybe that should be something that those people get aggravated over. And the notion that this is the thing that you're concerned about, a replay of 2016, I will make the point to you that maybe those people should be really pissed off and upset. Bob, these guys are out of their minds. Like, their priorities are so out of whack in comparison to what the public actually needs, what the public actually wants.
Yeah. And people buy it. I mean, that's what's amazing about it, just to go to the beginning
part
of your monologue, because so much of the news today is constantly around China. And so people are like super against Donald Trump, and then all of his messaging is anti-China. But then you get these news stories here about Taiwan and the World Health Organization and China blocking them out. And then we have this new story from a lot of the news that Beijing is going to enforce this new security law on Hong Kong. And so all the people, American people, all these liberals are like, China's so bad. Look how bad they are. And it's like, wait a second. You are so anti-Trump, but then you buy hook, line, and sinker all of the Western propaganda towards China, and you yourself start perpetuating the calls against China. So at this point, you're just kind of working against your own self-interest, which is bizarre, because if you actually look deeper into these stories, the U.S. sells at the same time $180 million in weapons to Taiwan. So you're basically putting a rubber stamp on anything that the administration wants to do, because you're so anti-China as well that now we're just selling more weapons to an island that's off the coast of China. That's going to be great for world affairs. And at the same time, everybody's so up in arms constantly about Hong Kong and this new security law that would increase surveillance on Hong Kongers and basically put in protections and security for the state. And then here in the United States, so tomorrow we have the Patriot Act and the FISA court. So exactly what are you so upset about, liberals? Are you mad at China? Are you mad at Donald Trump? It seems like people are never sure what they're mad at, and they simply just grab the headline for that day, and then they work up a frenzy and basically have the same support that Donald Trump is looking for. And so as much as people are anti-Trump, at the end of the day, they'll always be anti-China or anti-whatever world leader that we point our fingers at. And the same thing happened with Russiagate. How is this good for world affairs for us to basically have a xenophobic-oriented domestic policy?
Well, it's not. I mean, Carter G. Woodson had this quote that I never forget. If you lead a man to the back door long enough, the person not only looks for the back door, if it's not, the person gets expected. It accepts the back door and will look for it if it's not available to him. It's kind of like us. We have a broken culture. And this broken culture has gotten to the point where in the middle of a pandemic, we don't look at our government and say we demand rational action. Instead, our government behaves in these kind of weird ways, blames everyone else, and we just kind of go along with it. It just seems so bizarre to me.
That's always what's so crazy to me. And we talked about a lot about like Adam Schiff being the darling of the liberals' resistance against Donald Trump, but then he was pushing forward the Patriot Act and the FISA court. So what do you want, liberals? Pick a side. Jamara, with that, we do need to take our first break of the hour. In the first hour, we'll be talking about the continued detention of children in U.S. detention camps. The latest poll numbers on whether or not they would whether or not they would take on Donald Trump endorsed coronavirus vaccine. And we head to Tulsa, Oklahoma to talk about the evictions of black residents from their homes 1 week before the anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa massacre. And if that's not enough, don't you worry, Misfits. We have a second hour for you after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. So where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The Political Misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
Welcome back to Political Misfits, the show that goes against the grain. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of, kind of with Jamarl Thomas. We continue to bring you live broadcasting from our homes, despite our engineers still going into the studio to keep us live. Big shout out to all of our engineers to allow us to stay at home and stay safe. We continued the show. Now we are joined by Jason Zubo, an attorney and partner at Zubo and Plitcher PLLC, which specializes in immigration law, asylum, deportation defense, and appellate litigation, and a blogger at www.asylumist.com. Jason, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. How are you guys doing?
We're doing all right. I can speak only for myself. Jamarl, how are you holding up today?
I'm living.
We're both alive, Jason. That's
Yeah.
going to be our answer for us. We'll be more educated here after our conversation with you. That's right. For sure. Jason, we've asked you on to make sense of a few different things in regards to immigration. And basically, we seemingly have two things happening at the same time. We both have detentions as well as deportations of children. First, on the side of things when it comes to deportations, a headline in the New York Times reads, 10 years old, tearful and confused after his sudden deportation. Since the coronavirus broke out, the Trump administration has deported hundreds of migrant children alone, in some cases without notifying their families. But then we have this other side of the story, Jason, from NBC News, which reads in part, last Friday in a court filing, U.S. immigration authorities said in regards to continuing to refuse to release children from their detention centers is because the children's parents did not agree to be separated from them. Because of this decision, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement denied parole to virtually all of the 185 minors in its custody in centers in Texas and Pennsylvania. One of the reasons frequently listed in government spreadsheets was, quote, parent does not wish to separate. Friday's court filing indicates, according to ICE, that migrant parents were recently asked, among other questions, whether they wish to be separated from their children so the minors could be released to relatives or other sponsors. The advocates accused ICE of presenting parents with this binary choice, a policy which could lead to family separation, and that the administration was reportedly considered in the past to deter families from crossing the border. Prior to Friday's court filing, an ICE spokesperson said that the agency had, quote, not implemented what has been referred to as binary choice at this time, and was instead exploring all options in response to federal litigation. Jason, so some children are being deported, some children are being detained, and then we have this idea of binary choice and the legalities or processes to immigrant children being kept in detention centers kind of seems like a black hole. Can you make sense of what's happening right now?
I don't know that there is any sense to be made of what's happening right now. And you know, this has been an issue, obviously, for a while. I mean, when the Trump administration came in, one of their primary goals was to, you know, immigration and particularly asylum, and they were particularly concerned about people who were entering at the southern border. And you know, I've said this before, but it was essentially a solution without a problem. I mean, the system was working. We had a system to interview people who arrived at the southern border to determine whether they were potentially going to qualify as a refugee, whether they might be eligible for asylum. If they were, they would the most part, be screened for security background check and then released to pursue their cases in court. There was a very high rate of appearing in court. And so the idea that these people were sort of, really the myth that Trump ran on, the idea that these people were rapists and terrorists, was really a myth. It was false. But anyway, they cracked down, instituted mandatory detention, put all sorts of barriers, visual barriers in place. And this is, of course, in lieu of actually changing the law. And again, we as a country have the right to determine who gets to come into the United States. We have done that by passing a law that allows people who come here who have a fear of return to their country for certain reasons to seek asylum. And so what they have done now, and they use the pandemic as a basis to do it, is to prevent those people who otherwise would be eligible for asylum or other type of humanitarian relief getting protection here. And so some people are coming here, children included, being turned away, being deported back to their countries, including some examples of pretty young children, like 15, 16 years old, being sent back to Central American countries. Parents, are left when they're detained with this very difficult choice, and it's based in part on the idea that the administration is charging some of them with having committed a crime for entering the United States. So something that hadn't happened before. It's actually not illegal to come to the United States and seek asylum. It's written into the law, but they're charging them with various crimes, which allows the government to try to detain them indefinitely until their cases are resolved. But then, of course, if they're with their children, the choice is either separate from the child or keep the child detained. And so children were being separated. And the end result of all this was a kind of a chaotic situation at the border, where you had some children being separated, other children being detained, children being removed from their parents, hundreds of them. There was a lawsuit, many lawsuits. We're supposed
Jason,
to stop
I'm kind of curious on a process question here, whether or not you know the answer, but it seems like here in Washington, D.C., over the last 9 weeks, basically government officials have been making it up as they go. And one of the biggest issues we've found is that there's been such a lack of preparedness when it comes to writing rules or writing any type of guidelines in English that there's very little happening when it comes to actually translating this to to Spanish or other languages for immigrants here in Washington, D.C. to know what's going on. What's the language access issues that people are trying to find right now? If they don't speak English, it seemingly doesn't seem like people are going to be able to translate all of this into Spanish to be able to communicate with these folks.
Well, I think there's an issue of communication, and it's not just Spanish-speaking people who are entering at the border, although that's the large majority. So that has always been an issue, and they've resolved that issue in terms of potential asylum seekers by providing telephonic interpretation, and there are services, private services that the government would pay for that would provide pretty much any language that was needed. And of course, many people who work for ICE and for other government agencies speak Spanish. In general, right now, what's happening is immigrants are relying on nonprofit organizations and some for-profit organizations to help them and guide them and try to protect them. The problem is, no consortium of nonprofits or private organizations has the ability to stand up to the federal government in every case. And so what you'll see with these, for example, children who are being deported, the ones that are being saved from deportation get intervention from it, maybe a nonprofit or have an attorney somehow. But and they end up going into federal litigation to help these people. The problem is, there's just not enough resources to do that for every person who's at the border. And so you're really left in a situation who have the very few people who can afford legal help can get it. The few people who are lucky enough to get pro bono assistance can get it. But for many people, they're left on their own. And it really is an overwhelming situation. And I think this allows the government to get away with a lot, almost literally with murder.
Wow. Jay, speaking of getting away with murder, one of the stories I remember reading, I think it was a few weeks ago, showed that people with COVID-19 were being deported. And so you would have the United States as an epicenter of the virus at this point. And many of the people who were being deported to countries and basically sending people with the virus to those other countries. What's the likelihood or what's the potential for all of these people who are in these deportation cells, either in the immigration facilities or for that matter, I know we talk about it in jails, but the immigration facilities are also basically cages. What has been the propensity for these people to come down with COVID-19 or illnesses while being detained? Do you know?
What I have read is that there have been some flights where something like 70% of people on the flights were tested positive for COVID. And so, what of course happened is the United States is the epicenter for the epidemic, as you mentioned. And they're being sent back to El Salvador or Honduras, and then of course, bringing the disease with them. Whether those countries have the ability, the capacity to quarantine the people who are being deported back, but I don't know. But of course, that potentially creates a real problem for those countries. I mean, it reminds me a little bit, actually, of the problem of essentially deported lots of gang members, which kind of was the that kind of grew into this very terrible tree of the like the MS-13, the different gangs. I mean, those gangs began in the United States, and the reason they spread to Central America, where they really have been very, very damaging to those countries and harmed and killed many people, is largely because we deported people back to their countries. So, I mean, in a sense, like those are people who shouldn't have been here in many cases, and we had the legal right to deport them. But nonetheless, like the problem is, like they went back and they caused havoc to America. And as a result of that havoc, the people have been trying to come to the United States to escape the harm and the dangerous situations in their country. Now we have a situation where people who are sick are being sent back. That's likely to do much more damage to these already fragile countries.
Yeah, I really appreciate Jamal asking that question, because it does highlight the uniqueness of how the disease is impacting certain cultures and different communities. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit more to that, Jason. The stories here in D.C. are horrific, to say the least, that I've come up against here. You have families spreading the disease amongst themselves as they live in multi-family. Generations are in the homes together. You have some families scared to go to grocery stores or food pantries because ICE is always a looming threat. And then you also have other complicated issues, such as not being able to send money back to people's homes or families and friends in their home countries who rely heavily on U.S. money being sent back to those countries. Where are you seeing the stress points when it comes to the coronavirus within immigrant communities?
I see it like the people that I represent are largely asylum seekers who come from all over the world, not just Central America and South America. And for those people, right now the asylum offices are shut down for good reason, and how they will ever reopen, I don't know. A lot of these people are, maybe it's a dad who's come to the United States who filed for asylum and now has been waiting for his case for 2 or 3 years, hasn't seen his wife, hasn't seen his young children for that long, doesn't really know when he'll ever see those people again. And we've seen, this for years, that people who have been traumatized by the harm that they've suffered, or the threats that they've suffered in the home country, come to the U.S. and are really re-traumatized the asylum system itself. And so now throw in a pandemic on top of that, and all the uncertainty is sort of ratcheted up to to an exponential degree. Of course, people are out of jobs. That's a financial insecurity. But the one thing I would like to mention is, and I have several clients who are doctors or asylum seekers, and who are working in hospitals now, today, at this moment, fighting against the coronavirus, at the same time that they're being vilified by the president. And so, to see these people who are risking their lives to help us, they don't have any idea whether they'll be able to stay in the United States or not. It's a heroic thing they're doing, but it's also sort of depressing to think that they're really sacrificing and risking for us to help our country, to help us. And we are, to say the least, not reciprocating.
Yeah. Give us a call here on Political Misfits, 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. We continue to be joined by Jason Zubo. You can check out all of his work at the blog asylumist.com. Jason, I'm always been curious here on the show. We've been asking a lot of people in different fields how coronavirus will impact their field, both now and moving forward. We've already seen there be some cuts that have impacted the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. You mentioned a little bit about asylum seekers. Processes have been basically slowed to a halt because the offices are closed, and obviously Donald Trump's stay-in-place orders at the Mexican border continue on. I'm curious if you could see into the future, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years from now, how do you think immigration will be impacted long-term by the decisions that are being made today?
I mean, it's obviously going to depend on the upcoming election. Like, I know there's not great enthusiasm, I guess, on the left for Joe Biden. But I feel like, we're sort of looking at a real existential threat to the immigration system and in some ways to our country by what we have right now with President Trump. They have used every tool that is within their disposal, many of them not legal, in order to block people from coming to the U.S., legitimate asylum seekers, regular old immigrants, spouses and family members of people who are living here, workers. And that's their philosophy that they were voted in on. And I guess they can do that, but and of course they have a Supreme Court that is very deferential to the executive authority here, and the executive does have a lot of authority. And so, I think it's going to depend on what happens in the election. But if Trump wins again, we'll be in a situation where they'll probably not have the ability to change the law. What they've been doing is trying to basically nullify the law through a series of bureaucratic policy changes. Many people have said this, but they've weaponized the bureaucracy, and that's true. For example, a form that may have taken an hour to complete with a client now takes 2 hours. What does that do? It raises the price. It deters people from filing for certain benefits that they're entitled to. And so the overall effect is to reduce immigration. And that's the trend and the direction we're heading. And I guess I would be more able to accept that conclusion if Congress voted to change the law and we as a nation decided to change our laws. But that's not what happened. The law has not changed. What has changed is the implementation of the law and the use of bureaucratic mechanisms, raising fees, this type of thing, to block people from coming here. And it's, by the way, exactly what the Republicans and the right had criticized Obama for doing when he created DACA. Said, well, you didn't change the law. You don't have a right to grant an amnesty, quote unquote, to these people who are, the DREAM Act people who've been living in the U.S. for many years. But they've, now that Trump has come in, they've done the same thing, but the opposite direction, and it really has harmed a lot of people.
Now, to be fair, though, Jason, I agree with you. I mean, you're right. They're basically using bureaucracy in order to kind of to get their political agenda accomplished without changing the law. But the Obama administration was also putting kids in cages. They were also, I guess my point is, as bad as Trump is, Trump wasn't falling off of a cliff. I mean, basically, Trump was an extension of the previous president. And so when Obama was making the argument that we need to stop these kids, and I believe Clinton even made this argument, that we need to stop these kids from coming to this country or stop these people from coming to the country by basically making their conditions more difficult in the United States. I mean, I guess, can you speak to this notion that Trump wasn't basically falling off of a cliff? Or maybe you don't agree with that. I mean, if you don't agree with that, definitely make your point known. But that basically Trump is a tick further to the right as opposed to what the previous administration was that deported 3 million people.
I mean, when Obama was president, many immigration attorneys, our listservs and whatnot, referred to him as the deporter-in-chief. So in some circles, there wasn't a lot of love for him or his immigration policies. I think, sort of looking back, I had certain criticisms of him at that time, but now looking back, I'm like, well, maybe we didn't know how good we had it. I mean, the fact is the immigration law itself as written is not easy. It's not easy to come here, even in the best of times. It's not easy to win asylum, even in the best of times. But President Obama implemented the law. Some would say he, they said he was the deporter-in-chief, but the question is, was that because that's what the law required of him, or that's what he felt the law required of him? And what was he doing to try to change the law or to make things better? He didn't change the law. We've had the ability to change the law because there's just been no agreement on what to do. But he did some things that were positive, and he did some things that were negative. I guess I would push back on what you're saying to the extent that I think it's not a tick to the right. I think it's a push to the right. And on top of that, you have just the environment that President Trump has created with sort of the lies and the nastiness. And that really has created a climate of fear that did not exist, at least in my experience during the Obama administration.
I agree.
Yeah, no, I think you're making excellent points, Jason. I think for my opinion on it is basically as long as you kind of keep the status quo, it's going to allow those like Donald Trump to come in and push it to the far right. And Barack Obama definitely didn't codify things in law, and he definitely didn't make it a main issue. And we're seeing basically the fallout from that is now Joe Biden has no desire to go into Hispanic or Latino communities, as we're just talking about one set of immigrants. Well, Jason Duzbo, with that, we are out of time. Thank you again for joining us. Tell us more about what our listeners how they can find your work online and what they would find more at your blog, asylumist.com.
Thank you. So I write a blog called asylumist.com. It basically covers issues related to asylum. It's for people who are seeking asylum, people who are interested in asylum, and a lot of criticism about what's going on right now. But please check it out and please comment. I mean, I hope you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I always enjoy it. Jason, thank you again for joining us. With that, we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios TV News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show.
This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns. Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Line with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of, kind of, with Jamal Thomas. Jamal, we got about 10 minutes here, and I wanted to work through some brand new polls that are out there. I know you always love polls, so I have played a little game with you and our show and our listeners here to guess the poll results. We have two new polls out here from Reuters, as well as the Associated Press and the NORC, the North Center for Public Affairs Research. Jamal, just so our listeners know that it is true, you do not have the results in front of you. I've deleted them from the show script.
Right, I don't have them. I don't know the answers.
Them in front of me on a piece of paper, so no cheating here. You could have looked up the article, but I trust that you haven't.
I haven't.
I haven't. So, Jamal, we start here with the Reuters IPSOS poll published on Thursday, which interviewed 4,428 U.S. adults between May 13th and May 19th. Let's head to the game here. The first question, Jamal. What percent of Americans have little or no interest in taking a coronavirus vaccine?
25%.
You looked at the answers, Jamal. Get out of here.
Keep in mind, I cover news constantly, and so that one I knew. I don't know the other ones.
Okay.
That one I didn't.
All right. Well, yourself is 1 for 1. What a poll aficionado. Why are they paying pollsters? But we could just ask Jamal Thomas. I love it. 25% is the right answer. The next question here, Jamal. What percent of people said they believe the vaccine is riskier than the disease itself?
Interesting. I'm going to go with, if 25% say they won't take the vaccine, I'm going to say maybe 30% or around 25 to 30%.
All right, it's just over 40%. What percent of people said they believe the vaccine is riskier than the disease itself? Yeah, I mean, I know I rarely get the seasonal flu shot.
Oh,
I
get
think maybe it's been 5 or 6 years if I got it last, and it was probably because I was bored at CVS. I was doing the little blood pressure check with the arm, and the pharmacist said, "Hey, do you want a vaccine shot as well?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." But since then, I guess I haven't, Tomorrow.
Yeah, I've never gotten one. I didn't see the point.
Oh, really?
My thought was it was a capitalistic thing for them to push a vaccine, and the more people that you can get to get, basically, a company says, "Hey, I'm going to create this vaccine." And it's like, well, wait a minute. How do we know that this thing is working to prevent the flu? Well, we don't. Then why am I taking it? Like,
Sure.
it's such a weird thing. And that company has every incentive in the world to produce as much of that stuff as possible, whether it works or not. So, yeah, I never
All right, I like these next two. These two are pretty funny for me here. We have hydroxychloroquine taker and promoter. Donald Trump is the center of this next question, Jamal. The question, what % of respondents said they would be less willing to take a vaccine if U.S. President Donald Trump said it was safe?
Oh, God.
That's safe.
Oh, man. I'm going to say 30%.
Nice. 36% of people said they would not take it. If Donald Trump said it's safe, they are turning it down. On the other side of the coin then, Jamar, what % of respondents said they would be more willing that an endorsement from Donald Trump would actually encourage them to take it, thinking it was more safe? What percentage of people there?
I'm going to say, they're about 35% of Republicans in this country. I'm going to say every last one of them are Republicans. 35%.
All right. Well, it's half of the Republicans, maybe. Then 14% are still saying, and 14% somehow think Donald Trump is endorsed. That's terrifying when it comes to the hydroxychloroquine. All of a sudden, 14% of people maybe out there taking hydroxychloroquine if they think Donald Trump is somehow a medical doctor that they should listen to. Last question here.
They've been guzzling that stuff. Have you seen the ratings on that? Like, they've been taking that stuff in spades. The hydroxychloroquine.
Then we're going to have an obvious shortage of hydroxychloroquine at some point when people that actually need it to prevent malaria can't get it. Welcome to the global supply chain. Jamal, what % of college-educated white women said Trump's reassurance would make them less willing to take a vaccine?
Wow.
So
36% say Donald Trump would do it. All right, so it's like that has to be a percentage of women in this case. So let's say 16%.
All right, more than 40%.
Wow, I'm way off.
Donald Trump endorsed it. And that people got to remember, white women, 53% of them voted for Donald Trump. So a large percentage of people not trusting Donald Trump. That was an interesting poll result.
Weird.
There. Yeah.
Like, some of that doesn't even entirely make sense. Like, the first one that says, okay, basically, if Donald Trump, how many people think it's risky? Well, that number was what, 36% or something like that?
Yeah.
And then you have another number, how many people would take it? And the number was higher. So it's like, you think it's risky, but you're still going to take it?
Yeah, or it's men too, like trusting Donald Trump more than women do, which that's a shock there. I don't know how you could possibly believe that. Jamal, let me get to the second poll here. We just got a few minutes left before we head to Tulsa, Oklahoma. The next poll is out by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, which has released a poll of 1,056 adults, which was conducted between May 14th and May 18th. So the first question here, what % of Americans are at least somewhat concerned that lifting restrictions in their area will lead to additional infections?
Oh, probably 65%. It's going to be high.
All right, well, this is going to make you feel good. 83%.
Good.
So at least the vast majority is like, good job. Good job, America.
Yeah, good job. I mean, I know there's a certain segment of Republicans and Democrats that break on that. It's like a 20-30% difference between Republicans and Democrats on how severe they think the virus is. But good. I'm glad that they are perfectly aware that they can get sick and die. Good. That's good. That's a good poll.
And from the same poll here, 54% said they are very or extremely concerned that steps that are currently being taken will result in a spike of COVID-19 cases. So at least people are paying attention to the fact that the current steps are probably not the best steps. Next question here for you, Jamal. What % of respondents said that it's essential to reopening for people to return to self-quarantine if they're exposed to the virus?
Oh, God.
So now you're
asking. I mean, that should be like 80% by itself.
Just about 80% is the correct answer. You always kind of wonder what 20% of people think if you have the flu, you should go back to work and continue doing your job.
Freedom! I want my freedom and liberty. I got to go back to work. Can you imagine that? How stupid of a response is it? Like, it's like, no, they're ill. They're dramatically infectious. And yeah, they can kill right many people, especially pretending different demographics. But yeah, they should be able to go back to work. Who says that? I want that guy on the show for an interview.
Americans, I don't know. Yeah. American exceptionalism challenged by this latest poll, Jamal. Roughly what percentage of people said widespread testing for the coronavirus in their area is essential to reestablishing public activities, along with requiring people to keep 6 feet apart in most places and to wear face masks when they're near others outside their homes?
Yeah, that should also be around 80. I mean, I think people would, if people are saying you shouldn't go back to work, and if they're saying we're concerned about the virus, that number should also be up there. So I would say about 80%.
All right. Well, obviously, America has always got a curveball or two to throw you. Just 60% of people here, so 20% drop off, basically saying, no, just go back, normal lives, do your thing. If you do get sick, quarantine, but don't worry about taking measures to prevent that. A couple more here, Jamar. This number, what percent of people now favor restricting gatherings to 10 people or fewer?
Oh, interesting. That number is probably going to drop. I mean, maybe 60. I mean, it's going to either be 50 to 60. Republicans are taking a different tact on this. So I would say maybe 60%.
All right, you're getting ahead of the game a little bit by breaking down by Republicans and Democrats here. True poll aficionado, 69% of people said that we should now favor restricting gatherings to 10 people or fewer. What's interesting about that number, that's down 13% from just about a month ago. So times are shifting. So as I alluded here, Republicans versus Democrats, what percent of Republicans now say they favor stay-at-home orders, while about as many the question, what percent of Republicans now say they favor stay-at-home orders?
Probably 55.
Okay, closer here. 45% of Republicans favor stay-at-home orders. That's down from 70%. And that's really kind of just stay-at-home fatigue, I think, working at a maximum right now, Jamal.
I think it's that, but also Fox News has been really nailing this thing of the virus is not that bad, the virus is not that bad, we need to get back to work, liberty, et cetera, et cetera. Like, they have been having a very specific tone of we need to get back to work. And Donald Trump has been pushing
hold on for a second here. Now, let's ask you about the Democrats. What percent of Democrats, most likely not the Fox News viewers, what percentage of Democrats favor stay-at-home orders?
Oh, 70%.
All right, they're at 78%, but here that's down from 91%. So they actually had a less significant drop. They dropped their 13% compared to Republicans dropping a whopping 20% plus there.
Yeah, you're right. People are getting sick of being in the house.
I think so. Yeah. And obviously, too, if we have major class divides in this country. If you're an affluent white person and have wealth, have a home, have medical access, and you can get food, then, yeah, you're probably going to be fine. You're most likely not going to get the virus. You probably maybe only know a few people tangentially who do have the virus, but it's not impacting you. And you've been at home for 9-10 weeks now, and you're saying, like, wait a second, what's happening? And I think that's the great concern. Last question here for you, Jamar. This is from another AP Nordic poll, along with the University of Chicago Divinity School. I thought this one was quite interesting. What percent of people said protests, marches, and rallies should not be allowed at all during the pandemic?
Oh, wow. Well, it shouldn't be allowed at all. Let's say 40%, maybe. 40% are fascists. Let's go with 40% fascists.
are caring about health fascists, maybe. Yeah, Jamal, the number 50% of people, which is even more terrifying. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if people just aren't creative and like protest when it comes, if they protest from their cars, if they do say social distancing. But that's a terrifying number to me. If people are just like, we can't protest right now, and we're screaming on our show every day on Political Misfits, like, protest, go protest, go
protest.
This is the
moment. Yeah. I mean, because you have a crisis. I mean, in the middle of this crisis, you have a situation where these guys are just out to lunch. Like, the government is not paying attention, or it's like disconnected from what the public wants. I mean, yeah. I mean, and maybe I think they're in their heads, protest is very specific. You're going out in large numbers and you're raising your fists. Not, like you said, not having this kind of creativity in regards to how to do it safely.
Well, Jamar, let's take a quick break and we'll turn to our next guest, who is well familiar with protests in America's heartline. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind: color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schleicher here with Jamarl Thomas. As I mentioned, we were talking about protests there before the break and the importance of protests, especially in this moment. As I mentioned there, our next guest here is somebody well familiar with protests in America's heartland. We're joined by Dr. Reverend Mario Johnson, a community leader, activist, and public servant, as well as the pastor of Seeking the Kingdom Ministries and founder of Black Lives Matter Tulsa. Doctor, welcome back. Or welcome to this show. Welcome back to the network. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I see you put doctor on it, huh? So
I see you out there doing your homework. So we greatly appreciate your intellect in the movement. You're somebody I often turn to see what's happening there in Oklahoma. I thought of you this morning as an Oklahoma sheriff tweet made the internet rounds because basically it's the demands that they were going to start evicting people and people needed to pay their rent. The tweet had read, quote, this is difficult, but we want to give as much notice as possible. Deputies will start serving judicial eviction notices this week and enforcing evictions on May 26th. 2020. Once the order is served, tenants have 48 hours to leave. We'll be compassionate and respectful during those evictions. Reverend Johnson, this moment is an interesting moment to say the least, as next week will mark the 99th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre that took place on May 31st and June 1st, 1921. And it seems that we've traveled 99 years into the future, but Black people in America's heartland are still under attack by capitalist systems and by the police.
Right. It's a very interesting time that we're living into at this moment. With the COVID-19 and with Afro-Americans and brown communities being affected more than anybody else, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the little conversation that takes place there about talking about America's heartland, we covered the numbers over the last week or two about the impacts on Black and brown communities in the Midwest and across the Great Plains. But so much of the focus still continues to be in major U.S. cities, in New York City, as everybody praises Mario Cuomo's son, Andrew Cuomo, as well as other people continue to focus on U.S. cities. It seems like the Democratic Party, who speaks up for people or is supposed to be speaking up for Black and brown people, they don't really speak to the heartland because they don't win votes there. And that's really the problem with national politics, Reverend, is that so little focus is on rural areas or on red areas that are under Republican control. So I'm curious how you see the national conversation taking place and whether or not you feel like national politicians speak to what you are experiencing there with your community.
And I believe that Democratic Party should focus on more of Black votes and evolving and focusing on developed communities and people. They'll continue to be an overlooked.
Yeah, and Jamarl, isn't that really the problem with the binary political system that we have here, that it is just a simple game to win as opposed to represent people? And having a multi-party system, I think, would give way more people representation, because you wouldn't have Democrats basically just saying, you know what, we can't win in Oklahoma. Why even go there? Why even talk to those people? Why even try to fight for their vote? We're going to lose there in the Electoral College. And then all of a sudden that means the national politics kind of just ignores Oklahoma. If you actually had a different political system that could fight for votes across the country to take up some type of representative system, you would actually have people represented. But instead, with this binary electoral college system, people like Dr. Mario Johnson there in Oklahoma have no representation effectively.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, unfortunately, we have this system where you piggyback, Democrat and Republican. And you have a system because Republicans are horrible, Democrats can also be horrible. And they can argue that we're at least worse. So you have African Americans who vote Democrat to the tune of 90%, I think it was 91% for Hillary Clinton, basically in just a random year, which give you this notion and this idea that you have nowhere else to go. Meaning you're stuck with a party, despite the fact that that party is not going to do anything. You're more so just terrified of Republicans. That's a problem, because that means that in situations where they should have had rent controls, they should have had rent strikes, they should have had all those things, and the party that represented the left should have been there backing them up in those things. I mean, this is utterly disastrous. They're basically telling people in the middle of a pandemic, we're going to be kicking you out of your homes, but we're going to be compassionate as we kick you out of your homes. Reverend, I'm curious, what's your prescription for this? I mean, Martin Luther King, when he was pushing, he was doing basically sit-ins, but he was also making this thing of increasing the minimum wage and trying to put through policies that was going to affect his community, meaning of African Americans. But the Democratic Party doesn't really do that, meaning they don't necessarily have policies specific to the African American community, despite the fact that the African American community votes to the tune of 91% and that are disproportionately affected by this particular pandemic. I'm curious from your perspective, and maybe this trends outside of politics to some degree, but what is your prescription for dealing with these issues?
Because I even was believing that even Joe Biden's campaign should focus on Black initiatives, which is not really in his campaign or his platform. And so that is very important. Because it seems like with votes, it's more about representation. All of us winning or losing, but representing the people.
Yeah, and Reverend, I also wanted to ask you a little bit. I thought about you obviously a lot over the last few weeks there with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. I thought a lot about your good friend and your parishioner, Terrence Crutcher, who was killed there in Tulsa, Oklahoma by racist police officer Shelby Crutchley. Crutcher, I think I'm saying her name wrong, but I will be happy to do that and not correct myself there. But I was thinking a lot about you in the sense that we put so much national attention on these types of killings, on these type of murders, and that was over just about 4 years ago there, where the national attention was on you as well as Oklahoma. And now here we are 4 years later with another Black man killed, caught on camera, and very little has happened to address the root causes of these types of violent acts. I'm just curious what you thought of the Ahmaud Arbery killing.
Oh, well, yeah, another unjust situation. That America needs to hold those type of things accountable. We start holding those accountable to less of that when people know there's consequences. It'll be like slap, there's some things like that. And to continue on. It's what we need to do, just as a nation. Tolerate that type of behavior. We will see a decrease in that.
Yeah, and this level degree of tolerating it is quite remarkable. I think that is allowing it to continue. And, I was in Florida covering a murder case several years ago of a white man who killed a Black man. And I went to a local bar and I asked people if they had heard anything about it. They hadn't really heard about the case. I told them about it and they simply could laugh and say, well, we really are surprised that they even found the guy's body out here, that they would just disappear him. And then all of a sudden you're just like kind of freeze with ice in your veins and saying, wow, people in this situation get disappeared, which is quite horrific that these murders happen much more frequently than I think anybody has any attention or relation to. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately, there with you, Reverend Mario Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us. You're a community leader, activist, and public servant, as well as the pastor of Seeking the Kingdom Ministries. You're also a fantastic artist. Just tell us a little bit in 30 seconds here, where can people find more of your work online?
It's just right now, my Facebook, Mario Johnson. Look at the moment. People can go there and see. We're in the midst of a project right now. So after that, then it will be online and in certain places. Maybe I can come back on with this.
Yeah, fantastic. We'd love to continue to follow you. I'm always checking out your work there. The founder of Black Lives Matter. Tulsa, thank you for stepping up and doing that work. Jamal, with that, we do need to head to our second hour of news, politics, and culture. Lots to cover, including the potential peace broker that Russia might play to try to mend disagreements between the United States and the Palestinian Authority. We will also take a look at the latest trends by American celebrities in our weekly Trends with Benefits segment. Those celebrities may be looking good, Jamal, but like most crushes, they end up in flames. That and much more in our second hour. You listen to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in DC. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my disembodied co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We have a loaded second hour for you, including the sexiest named segment on the network, Trends with Benefits. The witty Miss Witty will be on to discuss that with us. That's always fun. As always, your chats, tweets, and calls are amply appreciated. You guys make the show what the show is, especially your engagement. You can reach us at 202-521-1320. That's 202-521-1320. Our engineers are picking up the phone lines. Just keep in mind they're doing like 20 things at the exact same time. So if they don't get to your call, please don't get discouraged. We will take it when we get the opportunity. Also, please be sure to keep it PG. So I, on my regular channel, and even on this one to some degree, have followed Brexit for the last several years, culminating in the last snap election where the Tories won a resounding, to put it mildly, victory that allowed them to basically push through the general contours of their Brexit agreement. That agreement, of course, was going to require further negotiations, but it was somewhat of a win that Boris Johnson was able to get through that policy. Well, those negotiations have been moving forward, but apparently not to the liking of the UK. Now, the UK technically left the EU on January 31st, but they're still under the EU's rules and remain in the single market and customs union until the end of the year. Negotiations have until then to strike a trade deal or end up back at the doorstep of a no-deal Brexit under WTO terms, basically World Trade Organization terms. Both sides have until the end of June to agree to an extension, but Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said he will never do that. Now, seeing that Bojo is not dead in a ditch, as the clock ticks down, he may have another change of opinion. To discuss this and several other stories from around the world, we're joined by international affairs and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's
Absolutely.
an honor and a pleasure to be.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you coming on. So, Mark, the chief negotiator for the UK, David Frost, basically accused the EU of quote-unquote only offering low-quality trade deals with quote-unquote unprecedented EU oversight of our laws and institutions. Now, considering that giving the UK a better deal outside of the European Union than if it remained inside the European Union just kind of negates the entire point of an economic union, was Brexit always a farcical idea? And let me explain that. Farcical in the sense that they were going to get some better deal outside of the European Union that they were going to get inside.
Yes, that's pretty much a no-starter from the beginning. You have to understand the negotiation position of the EU on any potential trade deal with the UK. They want to punish the United Kingdom. They want to make sure that the United Kingdom hurts so that there is not a demonstrative effect for other countries within the EU who might be considering the EU to do so. It is a measure, it is a deterrent measure to prevent other countries from considering leaving the EU. I mean, this is obviously going to damage both the economy of the UK and the EU, but the majority of the voters, at least who participated in the referendum in the UK, believe that identity issues are more important than immediate economic concerns. And right now, these trade deals are on loggerheads over such it sounds small, but they're actually quite big issues of fishing rights and border checks in Northern Ireland, which is an extremely complicated issue because Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and Southern Ireland, or Ireland, the southern part of the island, is its own separate country and part of the EU. So right now they're at loggerheads, and the Economist Intelligence Unit, for one, feels that there is a 0.0% chance of a trade deal being struck before the deadline.
Oh, wow. So, wow, that's interesting. I mean, I know the loggerheads. Like, this puts me in the mind of what Nigel Farage said. The moment that Nigel Farage was able to get in the European Union, Nigel Farage was always a colorful character in the EU because they hated his guts and he didn't necessarily care. But when he finally got through this idea of Brexit, Nigel Farage went to the EU and he basically chest thumped saying, don't, now that we've, we're leaving, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Making the point that, yes, you could take a position that you're going to try to hurt the UK, but you're going to hurt yourself in the process. But from the standpoint of the European Union, though, some of these guys are true believers in this notion of closer union. And so all incentives in the world are for them to basically try to injure the UK in this to ward off France, Poland, or not Poland, I'm sorry, France. There's one of the other countries in the EU, Italy, which has become Eurosceptic. Basically, there are several countries in the EU that are becoming Eurosceptic, and these guys are trying to basically head it off by wrapping Britain on the knuckles. Is that where this is coming from?
Yeah, I mean, the EU is under a lot of different pressures right now, more than just the coronavirus that the entire world is facing. There are geopolitical pressures, tensions between the U.S. and Russia that weigh on the EU. You do have the rise of very strong Eurosceptic movements, particularly in Italy, but in several other countries. Hungary has been declared by many within the EU elite to no longer be a democracy, and Brussels has sought to impose some type of punishment of sanctions on Hungary and also on Poland, which is a right-wing government whose moves on judicial reforms have also not met the approval of Brussels. There's all sorts of centrifugal forces right now. It comes at a moment when Angela Merkel, who has, been shall we say, the adult in the room in the EU for more than 2 decades in power, the Chancellor of Germany now, is preparing to step down and starting to look like somewhat of a lame duck. And the Brexit coming on top of all these other problems, continuing immigration problems with Turkey, some of which result in Syria, some of which are, actually the majority of the immigrants and refugees that Turkey has been sending on to the EU aren't even from the conflict and from Syria. They're from Afghanistan and Africa and elsewhere. So the EU is facing a lot of problems, and they're trying to tamp down on any potential other countries even considering pulling out of the EU, because for them it is both a geopolitical and an ideological platform.
Mark, I'm curious what role the United States plays in there. I'm sure they would love to have closer relations with the UK and take in some of those trade deals.
Yeah.
What do you make of the United States playing kind of a spoiler role in basically causing chaos or destabilizing the EU through their aggressive efforts to set up some type of trade agreement there with the UK?
I mean, that was always kind of what had been presented by the Trump administration as a default for the UK to pull out, that they could then have closer relations with the US, possibly with other members of the British Commonwealth, which is basically the institution for the devolution of the British Empire. And while the previous U.S. President Obama made clear that he did not support Brexit and would be no preferential treatment for trade deals, the U.S. has been dangling that in front of the U.K. as kind of a lifesaver for them in this process to try to limit the economic damage. And there's no question that Trump is not a big fan of the EU. And he has a personal animosity with many of the leaders of the EU and the countries of the EU who, when he ran for president, all those years ago in 2016, many of them made open statements endorsing Clinton or attacking him. And he has a bit of personal vendetta. So anything that makes their lives more complicated, you can bet that Trump will take advantage of the situation if he can, if he's got enough maneuver room with his own deep state, national security state that tries to limit his adventurism on foreign policy. If he can get away with it, he will make life more difficult for the EU.
Now, one more question on the UK. One of the intractable parts of Brexit that the UK was trying to deal with, Theresa May and Boris Johnson, was on this notion of the Good Friday Agreement and the way that any deal where you were going to basically say the UK is pulling out of the European Union, Northern Ireland supposedly is going to go with it, but the Republic of Ireland, which is to some degree attached to Northern Ireland, well, how are you going to do that without creating a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain? Well, we find out now that there will be a border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. I'm curious, what does this mean going forward in regards to policy? Is this going to create the reunification between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland based on the way the trade deal has basically put the EU or Northern Ireland into the European Union's orbit as opposed to the UK's orbit?
I think one of the most ironic things is the UK leaving the EU may also entail the dissolution of the United Kingdom itself. Yeah. There is a resurgent independence movement, a movement for a referendum in Scotland, for a second referendum on independence for Scotland. And right now, this is perhaps the best time. There is more talk in Ireland now about the solution out of all of this being a reunification of a single Ireland within the EU as the way out of this potential border crisis between Northern Ireland and the country of Ireland. And there's a lot of potential here, but there has been so much impetus in the other direction for so long that it will certainly not be something that happens immediately. It will still need a lot of trust gaining measures between both sides in this. And I think you'll have to see some of the economic and political damage play out for the people on the both sides of that Irish border before anything is actually done.
You know, Mark, I want to pivot to another story that is coming out that I find to be extremely interesting. Bob presented this one. Basically, Israel is going through with an annexation plan on areas of Palestine. Now, the EU has been against this, and they've been somewhat saber-rattling on this point. What powers does the EU have at their disposal to intervene in regards to stopping Israel from doing this? I mean, they weren't able to protect Iran, and they've basically been a patsy of whatever the United States policy has been, even though they may, vocally say something. They don't necessarily do anything typically. Well, they are making a lot of noise. What powers does the EU have? What leverage do they have at their disposal to somehow inhibit the plans of Israel to basically annex the rest of this region?
Well, in theory, if the EU had the political will to act as one and actually agreed on these and was willing to buck a U.S. foreign policy dictated by Trump. This whole annexation plan is because of his grand deal of the century he proclaimed, which basically would accept a shrunken Palestinian state if Palestine would accept what Israel has occupied and grabbed with directly settling of Palestinian territory, particularly in large parts of the West Bank. That if they accepted that, then the U.S. might consider recognizing the state. And there's the threat that if they don't accept the deal that Trump is offering, then the U.S. will end all economic assistance, relations, anything with Palestine and Israel would just take it anyway, and that's where we are. The new Israeli government, a coalition government now between Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, have basically agreed that they are going to annex parts of the West by July 1st, and they realize they have to do this while Trump is still in office. Because a Democrat like Biden might have more reservations on this than Trump would. So that they see a ticking clock. They don't know if Trump is going to be elected, and they are going to do this in July. The EU is wringing their hands, and they're making threats. They have the potential because the EU, taken as one bloc, is Israel's largest trading partner. The problem here is the EU is divided on the issue. While France and Sweden and Ireland and Luxembourg are making a lot of noise about this and saying that Israel can't go through with this, on the other side, many of the Eastern European countries, and Central European countries, Hungary, Romania, Austria, and Czech, are basically nixing any idea of sanctions. That on the Horizon 2020 Research and Development Program, the EU funds research and development in the EU, or the Open Skies Agreement, or even possibly considering the association agreement that the EU has with Israel. All those are measures that the EU could take, threaten Israel with sanctions if they go through with this. But there isn't the political will. There is division in the EU. They do not have consensus on this. Any statement against will be merely measured, and Israel knows this. And if there's any eventual sanctions punishment coming from the EU, it will be very weak and watered down, and Israel is more than willing to accept.
We continue to be joined here on Political Misfits by international affairs and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Give us a call, 202-521-1320 if you want to jump in on the conversation. Mark, I was curious what you made of a scoop that Axios had sent me here yesterday in my inbox. It said Russia floats summit to get U.S. and Palestinians talking. This comes from Barak Ravid of Israel's Channel 13 News. I was curious, Mark, what you make of this. Is it a real story? Is it just being floated out there as a potential opportunity for Russia to jump into the mix? But do you think Russia would be the best bridge builder between the United States and the Palestinian Authority?
No. I mean, it is a political gesture by Russia, and they are trying to retain some relevance what's going on, with the, Russia's position within the Middle East Quartet. And so on. But basically, the idea that the Russia could support Palestine and the U.S. started talking to each other again. They stopped talking when the Trump administration recognized essentially the undivided Jerusalem as the capital of Israel by moving the U.S. embassy there 2.5 years ago. That ended. I mean, the Palestinians stopped all communications, all diplomatic negotiations with the U.S. And since then, the Trump administration has only dictated this grand deal of the century that made clear the Palestinians would suffer if they didn't accept the terms of it. Russia is not going to get the Palestinians and the U.S. to sit down. The U.S. says they would only participate if the subject was Trump's Grand Deal, and that's what the Palestinians came to talk about, meaning that they would have to accept, on some level, those terms. And Palestine is simply not going to do this, and they've got increasing reason to be infuriated. They are going to see the occupied portions of their territory, particularly in the West Bank, officially annexed and accepted by the United States, the most powerful country in the world, which means they're seeing the dreams of any kind of substantial Palestinian state. Certainly anything that even remotely resembles the pre-1967 borders completely vanish. They're in desperation here, but they realize that there's no one in the U.S. for them to talk to us. They have no negotiation partner who is not a full diehard supporter and fanatic in support of Israel.
Mark, but I would agree that Donald Trump is more obsequious to the policies of Israel, but basically the previous administrations were just as obsequious. Even though those administrations pretended as if they were having some kind of balance and fair negotiation, we were always working with Israel. There was never a fair and equal negotiation in these processes, even though Donald Trump has taken this to the extreme. It sounds like you're saying this is a fait accompli, meaning basically nobody is going to step in to defend, protect, or speak up in any real way for the Palestinians, that basically Israel is going to go through with this. Whoever they have to kill, injure, or throw in prison, they're going to do it as they go about annexing that land, and the world is just going to watch without intervening.
Absolutely. And your own point that, multiple U.S. Administrations going back have essentially supported Israel. They haven't just gotten to that final step like Trump has with moving the embassy to Jerusalem and so on. But, everyone knows that even if Biden wins the presidency in November and takes office next year, that there isn't a much better negotiating partner for the Palestinians. They still won't have any support. They won't be able to reverse anything that Israel does while Trump is still in office. So I do believe it is fait accompli. I don't believe there's anyone who has the power to step in. Certainly they haven't done so far. Either the EU, Russia doesn't have that power, and still wants to maintain good relations with Israel, despite the fact that they do recognize Palestine as a state, and they are one of the best diplomatic partners for Palestine, but they're also not willing to throw their relations with Israel completely under the bus. No one has the power to stop Israel and the United States from doing what they want at this point, neither militarily nor economically nor politically at the UN Security Council. It is a fait accompli.
Mark, one last question on this. Bob made the point that Arab League, Saudis, Jordan, and Egypt have all sided with Israel on this. Why? Saudi Arabia had pretended as if they were backing Palestinians. Many of these other groups pretended as if Palestinians was on their to-do list. And I know that Israel and Saudi Arabia basically dovetailed in regards to their policies. But what's in it for these countries to basically back Israel in this process? Some of these guys were at war at one point.
The last Arab country that has really supported Palestine for several decades now has been Syria. And, they're not in a position to help right now. U.S. established several decades ago a triumvirate for a U.S. hegemony over the Middle East. And the two sides of that were with Saudi Arabia and Israel. And for a long time, it was kind of a hub and spokes relationship where this was arranged by the U.S. and accepted by both partners. But in the last decade, Israel and Saudi Arabia have moved closer and closer together on their own. And Saudi Arabia has essentially abandoned the real support of the Palestinians at this point. And they see a lot of potential for relations, for control of the Middle East, and more common and more in point, a common enemy that they both see in Iran. if Palestine is not an issue for either of them.
So, Mark, let's move to the Ukraine for the moment. Let's move to Ukraine, let's say it that way. So Joe Biden's Ukrainian chickens are coming home to roost. In Kiev, a district court judge, S.V. Volk, ordered that the country's law enforcement formally list fired prosecutor Viktor Shokin as victim of an alleged crime by former Vice President Joe Biden. Now, the court ruled that there was sufficient evidence to investigate Shokin's claim that Biden pressured President Poroshenko, including the use of threatening to withhold $1 billion in loan guarantees, amounted to illegal interference in Shokin's work as a Ukrainian chief prosecutor. Now, considering Biden was on stage bragging about this, I don't quite know how this can be defended. Now, law enforcement hedged on the judge's ruling, refusing to name Biden as the alleged perpetrator of a crime, instead listing him as an unnamed American. The judge ruled that this listing was improper and ordered the agencies to formally name Biden as the alleged perpetrator. Mark, like I said, considering that Joe Biden bragged about this, this is not all that alleged. Would there be consequences for this? And what would the consequences for something like this be, either in the United States or, for that matter, in the Ukraine, or in Ukraine?
And the biggest consequences for this right now are an attempt to drag Ukraine, in particular the president, Zelensky, novice, former comedian turned president, into a domestic U.S. Political struggle between Trump and Biden, between the Democrats and the Republicans. The reality is that the U.S. openly backed and helped orchestrate to some degree the overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014. And after that, Obama basically appointed Joe Biden as proconsul to oversee the country for him. That was the crime. Any question about U.S. pressure through Biden to fire this prosecutor general who was investigating Burisma, who had employed Biden's son on a no-job board deal where he basically collected a large sum of money. I mean, that's small peanuts by comparison. And the unfortunate reality is it's not really clear that this is a violation of the law in either Ukraine or the United States. It's certainly unethical. But, the real crime was the overthrow of the government. Anything after that is kind of small potatoes. This comes at the same time as recording of conversations between the previous Putsch president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, speaking with Biden about the prosecutor general and several other things. Make clear that Poroshenko was running the Ukraine, via phone conversations, on the orders of Joe Biden from the United States. They're really secret. And Poroshenko is basically jumping whenever Biden says jump. Now, recently, the new Ukrainian president, who has while he wants to continue the course of the previous president, has personal animosity against him that resulted from the election campaign. So he has said that these recordings, this relationship, now needs to be investigated as high treason, which is a very interesting development. This is him basically stepping into this divide between Democrats and Republicans out of his desire to hurt the previous president, Petro Poroshenko, the candy oligarch. I don't see this having a big effect on the U.S. elections. Americans don't vote on foreign policy. They're not going to vote or not vote on Joe Biden based on whether he got the prosecutor general of Ukraine fired or not. The biggest fallout of this is going to be in Ukrainian domestic politics.
Mark, I guess I agree with you, but I feel like it's going to impact Joe Biden if elected after the election. I don't know what the Democrats were thinking, that they went after basically Donald Trump in Ukraine, not realizing that the Republicans will do the exact same thing if they have control of the House, if they win it back, or able to push impeachment. But I just imagine hearing after hearing on this exact same topic, putting Hunter Biden on the spotlight, putting Joe Biden on the spotlight after the election.
that's a possibility. But here, the problem is that if this continues and the focus is tried to be shifted from Russia to Ukraine, and already there are figures within Ukraine already trying to blame these leaks on Russia and drag them into it and claim that Russia is behind this whole thing to try to divide Ukraine and the United States and so on. And they're perfectly doing a just fine job on their own of doing this. But I don't think that neither party in the U.S. wants to revisit the amount of U.S. support for the overthrow of the Ukrainian government and the regime that seized power in 2014, because they're not going to revisit it. I mean, that is something that cannot and will not be questioned by either party in Congress, because they both support what happened, the geopolitical flipping of Ukraine. I'm sure it will generate some headlines in the U.S., but I don't see it actually having a big fallout before or after. Putting Hunter Biden on the stand, may be some type of political retribution for the Republicans, but it's more an annoyance than anything else.
I want to move briefly to Venezuela. We have about 1 minute left, 30 seconds left in regards to the answer. But the European countries the other day at the UN Security Council were basically arguing that Venezuela was setting up or was doing something involving Silvercorp. Did you hear about that? You don't have to, if you haven't been briefed on this, you don't have to respond. But that's only if you're aware of the conversation that was taking place in regards to the UN and Venezuela. Can you give us a little bit of information on that?
Yeah, there was a coup attempt by a U.S. mercenary company that had at least the passive support of green light from the Trump administration. There's a number of connections there with a former Venezuelan general involved. It was a real fiasco. It was a bay of piglets. It was a joke. And now what the EU and the U.S. are doing at the Security Council, when Russia tries to denounce what happened there, the U.S. and EU are trying to blame Venezuela for daring to make a big deal out of a coup attempt on their country with U.S. mercenaries being involved. I mean, it's blaming the victim, raising that to the level of the UN Security Council. It's really shameful.
Yeah, well, with that more news about the U.S. meddling around the world with no consequences, we do need to put a pin in it for this interview with international affairs and security analyst Mark Sloboda. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find more of you and your work online?
You can find me on Twitter or Facebook or any number of radio shows on Sputnik where I'm a frequent guest, like Political Misfits.
Always love having you on. Thank you again, Mark Sloboda. With that, we take a quick break before coming back with our weekly Trends with Benefits segment featuring the one and only Michelle Whitty. I know I can't wait, Jamal. I know you can't wait. So let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik live in DC. We're back after this.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. You hear that sound? Trends with Benefits, the sexiest named show on the network. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am, of course, here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We have lots to cover. If you have something that you would like to call in on the show with, either something we've discussed or something that you just have on your mind, give us a call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Celebrities are on Twitter and on social media basically making a fool out of themselves. Now, to discuss, we are going to bring on the famed Miss Whitty, Michelle Whitty, our producer, to give her commentary on what she has seen on social media that has tickled her or potentially infuriated her. So, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi. Hey, I'm back. It's to clarify, it's only infuriated.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I guess I'm tickled by it, you're infuriated by it, so fair enough. So what's going on? What's the thing that has plagued you so to bring you back onto the show? And by the way, you're always welcome to the show. We always welcome you onto the show, so we always love it when you come on. So what's the angst? What's the issue? What's the consternation?
I woke up to this wonderful trend on this Thursday morning of musicians being idiots on Twitter. And I just thought we could break this down because I didn't want to let it pass. So I want to start with Lana Del Rey because honestly, I'm saving the best for last. But Lana Del Rey, I guess, was not getting enough attention this morning. And so she put up an Instagram post with a question to the culture asking if now that a bunch of other female artists have had hits about being sexy, wearing no clothes, having sex, cheating, etc., can she now go back to writing about feeling beautiful and enjoying being in love, even if she isn't in perfect relationships, and asked if people could stop crucifying her now. And so, of course, she set Instagram and mostly Twitter aflame with a bunch of people pointing out that the artists that she referenced were a bunch of black women. She said, see, look, if you like these black ladies being sexy, why can't I write my tunes about relationships? Which people definitely noticed. But I think what's really dumber is Lana suggesting that she paved the way for other women to stop putting on a happy face and just be able to say whatever the hell they wanted in their music. This woman's first studio album came out in 2012. So I don't know who she thinks she was paving the way for. Like, she's never heard of Loretta Lynn or Peggy Lee or like Jay Harvey, Tori Amos, Queen Latifah, Nina Simone wasn't out writing songs about complications and relationships and whatever. It's just nonsense. So yeah, lots of people getting mad at her, saying that she's racist. Then people getting mad at those people saying Lana's not racist. She's just trying to make a place for her voice and have people stop. She also said she's often accused of setting women back by hundreds of years, which incredible combination of arrogance and ignorance. I mean, hundreds of years, guys. Because she writes a song about how, I love my boyfriend, but sometimes he's mean to me.
I love that she also took swipes at like Beyonce and Ariana Grande and like other like well-known musicians and criticizing them for just singing about like sex and sexiness, and that was also really important for her to get out. This trend, Michelle, doesn't seem to stop with Lana Del Rey. It seems like other celebrities are having too much time on their hands and putting out lists and comments that they really shouldn't.
Oh, I mean, this is even better. But no, Lana Del Rey, she started off referencing like Ariana Grande, Cardi B, Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, and a couple of other people saying like they wrote about being sexy and complicated. Why can't I? And it's like, maybe if you wrote better songs, you would also have number one hits. I don't know, Lana.
I like Summertime. I'm just going to defend her just for that. Summertime.
Bob is throwing his body on the fire for Lana Del Rey. You do that.
Yeah,
Bob.
just like my toe. Just like my small toe on my left foot that I don't need as much as my right toe.
That is utterly hilarious. I like the fact. So I don't think she's racist. I think she's just massively out of sync with reality. Like,
I'm going to say she's racist. As a fellow white person, I think most of us are racist, and I felt like this was in part racist. I don't know.
I just thought she was massively delusional. I mean, like, is there a difference between...
Is there a difference there, or...
Because I take it as she's basically saying, like, there's a certain delusion in believing that like you said, she came on like the in the 90s or 2000 or something, and that she paved the way. Paved the way for what? You're just getting to the scene. Music had been out for like hundreds of years.
Exactly. This is what drives me crazy. As far as I mean, I don't know if Lana Del Rey does anything but music. So I just feel like maybe, like, she doesn't have to be an expert on everything, but like maybe she should have some idea of what was happening in music and in songwriting, even just American songwriting, maybe beyond 10 years ago. That's what is bonkers to me. So, like, we can argue about whether Lana Del Rey was racist or not. I can tell you pretty sure this next one is pretty racist.
Go for
it. Incredible is Mick Hucknall, who you may not remember for his name, but was the lead singer of the band Simply Red, which was very big in the 80s and early 90s. He's, still around, still tweeting. And this morning, he decided to tweet the top 5 coolest cultures on planet Earth. And I'm going to read you this list verbatim. Quote, number 1, African Americans. They invented cool. 2, working class British musicians. 3, a close third, Jamaicans. 4, Jewish Americans. And 5, listen, I apologize, I'm going to use an offensive term here that I wouldn't use, but this is his term, flamenco gypsies. He dropped that years ago.
I like the close third, Michelle, that he was like sitting there just like grappling it with it for hours and couldn't decide which one to put ahead of the other. And he's like, I just slightly ahead. I got to do something here.
It's like, I love the Jamaicans. Good with the Jews, but I love the Jamaicans. I love that. I'm so curious how he developed this list. Like, what was he thinking where he said, you know what, I got to put this down. I have to write this down. This is really plaguing me. I got to write this down. African Americans get number 1. They've invented cool. I love this list. This is so weird to me that this was the thing that was on his mind at that moment.
Yep. Well, the Irish are in the top 10, and then he followed up by just making lists of like his favorite Black people and his favorite Jewish people and his favorite Jamaicans. It is unbelievable. So yeah, that got a lot of response also. People saying, so let me look this up a little bit. Tomorrow he'll be ranking his top 5 favorite religions and sexualities, or calling this the Twitter World Cup of ethnicity. And some people saying this makes them ashamed to be a ginger, I swear to God. So yeah, I don't know. I've never woken up and thought that I should probably rank the coolest races and ethnicities in the world. But maybe I could start with this list.
That never occurred to me. Honestly, that never occurred to me to do that. To be like,
what?
I gotta write this down.
What's your top 5? No, I'm not going to put you on the spot like that, Michelle.
Yeah, a really good idea would be for us to do that now.
right.
Let's
see, number 1. Yeah.
As somebody coming from a not cool culture of us white Euro Americans, I'm gonna hard pass on this game.
Right. It's funny. I remember Simply Red. I mean, this was like 20-something years ago when this band was out, and this guy's still floating about in the.
Oh, I had no idea who they were, but I looked up the guy's net worth $60 million.
No way.
They're simply before my time. Get it? Simply okay.
That's shocking.
Simply racist.
We're in the wrong field, Bob.
Of the wonderful Meltdown May, which has also seen Trump and Nancy Pelosi calling each other fat, and then saying the president's like a child who has doggy dew on his pants. And we also had Chrissy Teigen getting into a fight with a food writer and then shutting down her account. So yeah, there's been a lot of great online drama this month, and this is just some top-notch bad anti-feminism, sexism, and racism, just all in one day.
Yeah, can we talk real quick about, Jamal, you told that story yesterday about Nancy Pelosi fat-shaming Donald Trump, and I was just like amazed to see the response by people, because people were like, wait a second, we shouldn't fat-shame the guy. We could focus on all the horrible things he's actually doing in his policy. And many people, and Michelle, you had mentioned earlier, kind of felt like the whole like Putin and Trump are gay for one another. So we were being homophobic, and now we're fat-shaming Donald Trump. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump can like play the victim card. And it's like the most upside down world that we have all of a sudden people like, wait a second, we went too far at criticizing Donald Trump. And part of me is like, the United States presidents are like bombing people and killing people, and we're pushing endless imperialism. Fat shame them all you want. Who cares? That's not what any of our focus should be. But then on the other side of things, I'm like, well, wait a second. This is also not healthy to be homophobic and fat shaming. So why are you even going to that insult? But Nancy Pelosi can't insult the guy on bombing and killing people because she's in on it, I guess. So instead, she has to come down to just these petty attacks. I don't know, Michelle. What did you make of it?
I mean, I thought it was dumb. I thought, this is the one thing that you don't attacking Trump for what he looks like is, it's a distraction. It's a way to sort of perform antagonism against him while you're not actually doing anything. And homophobia isn't funny no matter what side you're on. Fat shaming people isn't funny no matter what side you're on. It's just like there's other stuff to criticize him for, not things that are, not necessarily his personal choice.
Is his hair on or off limits?
Excuse me?
Is Donald Trump's hair, is it on or off limits?
Hair is on because it's a choice. That's also why makeup is on, because it's a choice. So Sarah Huckabee Sanders, when people were saying your eyeshadow is not good, but you weren't born with your eyes like that, and it's a dumb choice.
Wow, that's pretty strong, Michelle.
Yeah, well, you look at me. I got opinions. No, I remember.
That's really strong. I appreciate that. And the funny part is, I agree with you, right? Of all the things that Donald Trump has done, the fat shaming thing just seems, sad, worthless. I mean, when you look at failure of policy, and you think to yourself, well, why do you have to go to the fat shaming stuff when you can just point to the horrible things that he's been doing? But like you make the point, Nancy Pelosi has backed many of these policies, whether it's that military budget, whether it's the policy with Venezuela where she brings on the guy who hasn't won an election to a pie shop, Juan Guaido, and act like the guy's president. Like, the Democratic Party is not drastically different in regards to policy from the Republicans. And I think that's maybe the issue, this kind of weak resistance or non-resistance that these guys are just kind of running with. So yeah, I agree with you. It's worthless. Go for it, Michelle. I'm sorry.
Reminded it was like a Comedy Central special or something that was billed. It's part of their historical roast series, and so this was an attempt to do a roast of Anne Frank, which to start with is a very bold
that's risky. That's really risky.
Oh my God. But it ended up being very bad. And one of the reasons it was very bad is that it turned into just a roast of Hitler. Great. Give me more, do that. But the only thing they kept repeating was that Hitler supposedly only had one testicle. And it's just like, guys, this is the one thing to make people feel sympathetic to Hitler about is if you only make fun of him for having one testicle. The one thing that he didn't decide to do that was terrible.
Is that true, by the way?
It's boggling.
Is that true, by the way? Did Hitler only have one testicle?
I do not know if it's true or not.
Okay.
It might be true.
Yeah.
Michelle, it seems like the celebrity trend of meltdowns and incoherent ramblings didn't stop here with our musician friends or the Nancy Pelosi. Joe Scarborough also had a letter out that you brought it to our attention with his own kind of meltdown against people saying that America is not exceptional. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
It's going to be difficult because I only got 2 paragraphs in and I felt like my head was going to explode. Joe Scarborough submitted what is basically a 6th grade essay on patriotism to the Washington Post today, an opinion piece called "I Believe in American Exceptionalism. That's what makes this crisis so hard to accept." And it's like, okay, first off, Joe, don't start your piece by basically saying, "I'm an idiot." Okay, this is my first piece of advice. So saying, "I believe in American exceptionalism," okay, you're putting up a big roadblock right there. But he starts off by saying, "Believe in American exceptionalism and think those who don't must be so blinded by their own prejudices that they can't see the facts right in front of them. The United States military might and economic prowess remain unrivaled." And then at that point I had to stop and hyperventilate into a paper bag because This guy brings the news to a lot of people every morning, and there is just nothing in that first paragraph that is correct. Military might being unrivaled is rivaled by the Taliban in Afghanistan, who we haven't been able to defeat in 20 years. When was the last time we actually won a war? No? The economic prowess, okay. I mean, I have no response to that because we are sitting in the middle of this response all around us, right? We're in the middle of a Great Depression, but okay, Joe. He also goes on to say that it should surprise no one that a country born in the Age of Enlightenment would thrive so mightily in science, medicine, and technology. And again, Joe, it's like, do you know that there is a world around the United States? Maybe you should take a trip to South Korea, where they have the fastest Wi-Fi. I mean, a bunch of dams just broke in Michigan after a couple of days of rain. So I don't think we're really at a point where we should be resting on our technological laurels. And in medicine, I mean, maybe you could say our insurance companies and our pharmaceutical companies are thriving, but Americans aren't. We have the lowest life expectancy at birth of any comparable nation. For most leading causes of death, mortality rates are higher than in the U.S. It's just it's just nonsense. It's just flatly untrue. So,
well, just to correct you there, Michelle, you did say no other comparable nation. No one is comparable like the United States. There is no comparison.
That's why. That's okay.
Yeah, that's unhinged. That's massively unhinged. I mean, we're literally sitting. I love the fact that he starts off saying, you know, he's that's why it makes this so hard, and never really accepting the premise that maybe you're not exceptional at all. And if you realize that you weren't exceptional, maybe it wouldn't be so hard. Like, it's hard because so many people are dying, not because it impinges on this idea of exceptionalism. The exceptionalism thing is nonsense. The United States was able to get in on the Second World War. And we, along with the other nations, won that war. But let's be very clear. Russia took the overwhelming brunt of that war. And so for all of this notion of, you know, the publicizing that we did great and now are, you know, storming the shores was the thing that won the war, that's not really true at all. I mean, it was a world effort. I guess I'm making the point that the exceptionalism stuff basically came around with this notion that all of these other countries in Europe were decimated. And the only economy that basically survived was the United States. And you can be pretty exceptional too and build up an amazing economy if indeed your country was not ravaged by a war. So it's like the exceptionalism thing was always nonsense. And
it was an exceptional move, Jamarl, to basically take credit for liberating people there at the end of World War II and then escaping back home and giving no one else credit but claiming you were the freer, and then having sent decades of movies that basically portray you as such. So maybe an exceptional PR move that the United States made.
That was exceptional. And there's one other point that Michelle is kind of implicitly making, right? That basically that exceptionalism stuff hides real problems. Meaning, if you can convince your society that you're the exceptional society, then all of these other failures and everything else basically, you know, get hidden and get pushed in the basically hiding behind the whole notion of exceptionalism. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Michelle, let me ask you here a few last stories. We'll continue to the end of the show here. We got about 10 more minutes left, and the amazing opportunity to talk to our fantastic producer, Michelle Whitty. Speaking of exceptional, one person that, I'm sorry, Michelle jumping in, letting me know there is more on Joe Scarborough. You can go ahead and hit him as much as you want, Michelle Whitty.
I'm sorry. I didn't want the end of this to go unremarked. He says, he says the only thing exceptional about this president's management of the crisis has been his gross negligence that has allowed so many people in a country that remains home to the best and brightest innovators the world has ever known. And it's just like, again, there are a lot of Americans who really think that history began with this country and continues only up until this moment, and that nothing else has ever existed. You know, I mean, I can pull together on the top of my head a list of wonderful, bright innovators who were not American. You know, like Newton, Galileo. I mean, it's just, and that's, of course, an extremely Eurocentric list because of my American education. You know what I mean? But it's remarkable to me that we can allow these extremely well-paid, high-profile figures continue with this narrative of exceptionalism that really does not withstand like a sixth grade level of critical thinking. That was all I had to say about Joe, guys.
Yeah, but nobody, it's one of those things that they repeat so often. All of the presidents, all of the people who are on television and everything else is never questioned. And so from mainstream media's perspective, that's what they run with. And so the public doesn't necessarily challenge it. If I told you, Michelle, you're sweet as pie, are you going to be like, yeah, screw you, buddy? Or you're going to be like, yeah, he's not that bad. I agree with you on that. Meaning he's sweeping up the public to some degree in order to, the public basically accepts that kiss on the ego, whether it's true or not. And it's not true. It's just not.
I mean, it's amazing. You mentioned the sixth grade level. They always do those studies of like, is Congress getting dumber or just more plain spoken? In 2005, they had measured it that Congress spoke at an 11th grade level according to the Flesch-Kincaid scale, and then by 2012 it was at an 8th or 9th grade level. And 8 years later, Michelle, you might be right that it's at a 6th grade level there with Joe Scarborough being one of the major political commentators in this country. And it's just the dumbing down of America. Like, this is why we're losing to China, and we're so upset about losing to China that we only can scream about losing as opposed to figuring out how to win again. I'm borrowing some MAGA language there. We got to win and start winning again, and that would seemingly be rebuilding your domestic infrastructure and addressing healthcare needs and not having the largest coronavirus pandemic, the most brunt of the impact here in the United States. Those would be good ways to maybe address those, Joe Scarborough, and then we could talk about America being exceptional. I did want to just ask two of you folks here, Michelle and Jamal, some of the smarter folks that I know, what happened to Dr. Anthony Fauci? Fauci was the face of this whole administration. He was the guy that was giving me confidence. The last time he gave a televised interview was May 4th. He obviously testified to Senate on May 12th, but since he's been basically at the back bench, I'm curious if Donald Trump put him behind on the back bench and asked him to no longer talk. Was it out of a lack of loyalty? Was it trying to just kind of change the public image? Jamar, what do you think?
They got rid of Fauci because Fauci would have said things that went against this whole notion of opening up the economy. I mean, keep in mind, Donald Trump has been lying from the beginning, initially saying, oh, this is going to be over with. Oh, this is going to just go away, etc. The life total is going to be 50,000, 80,000, 100,000, 200,000. But if you have Fauci out there who basically is very relatively honest, and if Fauci says, look, we're opening up the economy too fast, or Donald Trump is doing things that is problematic and it's going to create a secondary case of this, well, Donald Trump doesn't want that. So Donald Trump gets rid of Fauci. I think that's where it boils down to. Michelle, what do you think?
I'm going to say hiking the Appalachian Trail or hanging out with a mistress.
I'm hoping the mistress. I want him to at least be having fun if he's out of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I think that Fauci has clearly tried not to rock the boat and has tried not to antagonize Trump. But he also, I don't think that he has really been up there lying. Right. And so, yeah, you turn the focus to opening up the economy and have a doctor up there who's just going to say, well, yeah, no, that's not the advice I would give. Yeah, no, that's not the advice I would give. So I think that's got to be why.
Yeah, let me just read one last story here. It's been heavy on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners there. It's kind of a more serious, I guess coronavirus is pretty serious, and what's happened to Dr. Fauci is also extremely serious. But in international climate news is quite terrifying here. Cyclone Amphan is wreaking havoc in India and Bangladesh, like major havoc, people. Dozens of people have been killed so far, nearly 100, according to early estimates. 700,000 people in India have already been displaced. The UN office in Bangladesh estimates that 500,000 people might have lost their homes. 5 million people are without power, according to an Al Jazeera report from 2 hours ago. And reports on the ground describe whole neighborhoods looking like they've been run over by a bulldozer, either because of the storm's 115-mile-per-hour winds or the huge storm surge it brought. And there is still, of course, going to be heavy rain as the storm weakens, causing flooding particularly in an area of Bangladesh where about 1 million Rohingya refugees from Myanmar are currently living. Jamal, about a minute left here. So often we kind of think that there's going to be some like announcement like, hey, everyone, a pandemic's coming. Hey, everyone, environmental climate change is coming. Like, prepare yourself for the apocalypse or like the dystopian. Like, none of that preparation comes. Like, it's just going to come. Yeah. And it's just going to hit us in the face, and we're just wholly unprepared. And we're seeing this now pandemic on top of these natural disaster crises unfolding around the world.
We're frog in boiling water, basically. I mean, the water heats up slowly. You don't necessarily perceive it until it gets too hot, in which case you boil. I think that's kind of where we are. But climate change is always a difficult issue because it's hard to actually see. It's kind of amorphous, It's not something where you can put your hands on per se, and so other things take priority. But yeah, it's there. I mean, you can look around you and see the Arctic ice melting, the degradation in regards to the amount of nutrients in our plants and food, all of those things. The signs are all around us.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you make about how we don't really like see it, because in many ways too, we're such a digitized population of people on the planet now, at least here in the West, that we always go to check the weather on our phone as opposed to just like stepping outside and feeling the changes and paying attention to weather patterns that you would actually notice it. I mean, you could talk to a farmer and they could tell you the temperature a year ago on that exact same date. Those people are actually experiencing it. The rest of the world, or at least again, Western culture, American culture, seems blissfully ignorant is the word. Yeah, that's what I was looking there for. With that, we do have to go for the day. We are out of time, unfortunately. Big thank you to Michelle Whitty for joining us for extra time there at the end of our show for our Trends with Benefits segment. Reverend Mario Johnson, Mark Sloboda, and Jason Zubo. Big shout out, as always, to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul for keeping us live on the air. We have one more show with you tomorrow, Friday, May 22nd. Thank you to our entire Sputnik News team. As always, our producer, Michelle Whitty. On behalf of Jamarl Thomas and myself, I'm Bob Schlehuber. Thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, as always, amply appreciate it that you guys joined me for the show. So one of the questions I have, we have two chats. Xavier Falston, did you hear Biden's audio of the big call yet? Also, was the audio tape between Biden and Poroshenko? Yes, the audio tape was supposedly between Biden and Poroshenko, and Zelensky is apparently calling for an investigation. Ukrainian President Zelensky called for an investigation Wednesday of the leaked recordings purportedly depicting Vice President Biden telling Zelensky's predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, that his country will receive U.S. aid once top prosecutor Viktor Shokin was replaced. The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee has acknowledged such a thing. I mean, that's kind of my point, right? This is one of those things that he said already on stage. Shokin purportedly has said under oath that he launched a probe concerning Hunter Biden's role in the Ukrainian energy firm Burisma when he was ousted. Hunter Biden had a lucrative post there despite, we already know about the post, he was getting $80,000 a month and had no experience in oil or gas, or for the matter, the Ukraine. It is the weirdest thing ever. Joe Biden, they're basically impeaching Trump for something that they gave Biden a free pass on. Biden stood on stage and admitted it. So if Trump was guilty, then Joe Biden is damn sure guilty. Occurred the immortal, vote for Trump, Jamal, unironically. If I can't vote for Biden, I can't vote for Trump. I mean, I thought about it in the sense of saying, this is a punitive thing. But the catch is, if my justification for not voting for Biden is that he doesn't back the policies that his constituency is supposed to back and that the governmental edifice is broken, Trump doesn't fix that. In fact, Trump, you can make a case, makes it worse. The immortal Accord, God, I can't pronounce that name. Accord the Immortal. After 2 terms of Obama, only Trump election can balance the force, Jamal. I don't agree with that. I really do believe that the way you deal with the political process is not putting in Trump. I think the way you deal with it is being outside the process and pressing on that process. Whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, your political system is not paying attention to you. You must understand that, how drastically weird that is. You have a Frankenstein monster of a political system, of a country that goes bombing around the world, and when you're in the middle of an emergency, that country turns a 10-ear to the country who says, don't open back up the way you're opening back. People may be sick of being in the house, but they also don't want to die. Trump is not your answer. I'm sorry, he's not. I don't want Joe Biden to win, but I don't want Trump to win either. I don't have a dog in this hunt. During the levy, Joe Scarborough killed the former lover and congressional staffer when he was in Congress. Check it out. So I heard Joe Scarborough's joke about that, and I heard Donald Trump bringing that up. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that's true. Old Gringo, Supreme Court, Roe v. Wade. Yes, we did that story yesterday. So Roe from Roe v. Wade basically turned on the abortion issue. Now, she eventually comes out and says, look, I lied. I never changed on this issue. I still believe in abortion. I was paid by right-wingers to basically back this issue. And so that's where that one is gone. All right, got to get to a meeting. Like, share, and of course,